introduce law after law to make more and more things labeled crime. So things that weren't necessarily a crime before are increasingly becoming a crime now. You know, in some states, you can't even, for example, get a driver's license if you're undocumented. And in other cases, there have been a number of crimes that make you deportable, but under state criminal laws, they aren't even really considered felonies. And I'll get into more detail about that. So we're seeing an environment wherein more and more people are being labeled as criminals because the laws are just getting more and more expansive. And that impacts many Southeast Asian Americans. So these are just a few pictures of some impacted folks throughout the country that CRX had the honor of helping and supporting with their cases. But there were two laws that I shared in the previous slide that were passed in 1996. And essentially what these laws did that impacted Southeast Asians were one, expanding the number of crimes that could make you mandatorily detained and deported. So basically, under this law, it expanded the number of crimes that would fall under the category of an aggravated felony. So basically, all this is, it's a crime that would make you deportable, even if you are a green card holder. So many refugees that got their legal status could be deportable for a broad number of crimes. And some of these crimes are not considered aggravated or felonies in state criminal justice system. So for example, public urination, shoplifting, writing a bag check. Some of these crimes can make an individual deportable all of a sudden. Second, elimination of judicial discretion. All this means is if you create an aggravated felony, you are automatically sentenced to deportation and you don't have any right to see an immigration judge. So it's very, very different from how we run the criminal justice system in this country. So it basically limits your access to due process. And as many of you know, since many of Southeast Asian Americans came here as refugees, they have very unique experiences filled with lots of trauma. And it doesn't even allow them to kind of shed light on that background before they're automatically sentenced to deportation. And lastly, these laws were retroactive. Who knows what retroactive means? Or does anyone have a guess as to what that could mean for this particular law? So this law was passed in '96. So in many cases, if you committed your crime, say in 1986, and you went to prison and served your time, and got married, had kids, and this law passed, you could basically still be deported for that. So you didn't know the consequences at that time, but you could still be caught up in the deportation pipeline. So these are just some quick numbers. Those provisions or those laws impacted Southeast Asian Americans greatly. So compared to other immigrant communities, there's a larger portion of Southeast Asian Americans that are deported specifically for criminal convictions. And as you can see, the numbers are quite high. What is troubling, though, is since this law was passed, there have been around 16,000 community members that have been issued deportation orders. But out of those 16,000, only about 2,000 of them have been deported. So about 14,000 people continue living in this country, but kind of in a state of limbo. They don't have their green card anymore. They could be deported at any time, but they're still, you know, they have their families, they've moved on, they've rehabilitated, but none of those factors kind of matter, given the current immigration law. And this is where it gets kind of tricky. So for Laos and Cambodia and Vietnam, because of the war between the US and these countries, there are unique relationships between the United States and them, and that not all of the countries accept deportees back. So for example, Laos, they currently do not have an agreement with the United States, so they refuse to accept deportees at all. Vietnam, they do have an agreement with the United States, but they only accept people that came after 1995. So if you came as a refugee, you should technically be safe. Cambodia is the only country that actually has a signed agreement with the United States and is actively taking deportees back. They send back a number of people every year. But compared to other immigrant communities, the numbers are a bit smaller, but they are taking them back. Well, and there's some implications around that given the current administration, but we'll get into that a little later. Yes, question.
Okay, so my question is, where does Hmong fit in that? So
yeah, we don't have it broken down because this is data from the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement Office. So the only data they have is broken down by country of origin. So we don't have a specific breakdown of like the Hmong population, unfortunately. And to be honest, because Laos doesn't really accept deportees compared to the other communities, we don't have as much data and stories from the Hmong community, and which is something that I really love to ask everybody in this room's help on. Oh, go ahead.
I guess like going off that, like maybe I'm making the assumption that maybe most people don't even have citizenship of the country, or maybe like they're not, or maybe like because they don't have citizenship of the country, like in Laos, and like they were to go, and then fled to Vietnam, and then they were to be deported back to Laos. Like there's that.
Like this confusion with citizenship, so maybe that's why. That's a really good point, and that's an argument we always try to make. Because even for Cambodians who get deported, a lot of them weren't even born in Cambodia. They were born in like refugee camps. So it's kind of shocking that Cambodia still takes them back, or the US tries to deport them there, even if technically they've never even lived in that country. So there is a lot of question, because during that time, during war, there was a lot of influx, there wasn't proper documentation, and there's always a struggle to prove citizenship, which is why I think compared to other communities, these communities are a bit slower with accepting deportees back, so that's definitely one factor.
You guys didn't have Thailand up here?
Yeah.
So does Thailand ultimately like non-proportionally or like
unfortunately, I am not as knowledgeable with Thailand because we do focus on Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia. I do believe that Thailand does accept deportees back though. I'm not sure if your question is if they accept like those born in the refugee camps but from these other countries back, that I'm not as familiar.
Well, I'm just talking in general, just because like I just like didn't see it up here and like I think that Thailand also has like a big role in like something. I was just
Yeah, well, it's honestly, it's primarily because CIRAC focuses on these two communities. And I mentioned like I'm Filipino American, and sometimes I think, well, I'm Southeast Asian too, but I don't share that like refugee political identity. So there's, I guess that's kind of where the discrepancy comes in. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't have any data for that. Any other questions before we move? Are you guys still awake? Yeah. Okay. So now we'll go on to the national and political landscape. Okay. So does anyone want to talk about, we all know who our president is, right? So what have you guys all been seeing on the news with regards to the Trump administration, with regards to immigration, refugees, deportation? Like, what have you guys sort of been observing? Anything specifically troubling to you guys?
Well, I recently saw that people with DACA are being sent back. So that's like the latest thing I heard, which is really concerning to me.
Do you want to explain to everyone what DACA means, just for those that don't know?
So I don't know fully what DACA is for, but what I do know a little bit is that those who come here with that are undocumented, so DACA was, you probably know more, they have DACA as a way of staying here so that they can go to school for a lot of undocumented immigrants.
That's a good explanation. That's exactly. It was basically a program under Obama that gave temporary protected status if you're undocumented, if you fit certain criteria. Yeah.
Like some of my students have, asked me questions like, well, my parents don't have certain documents, are we going to be deported, and so I don't know how to answer, in the light of, our president. And so not only that, but I have other students who have been here, for a long time, but they've let, their alien identification cards expire, and they have no identification. So that pertains to our Hmong community, and I don't know how to answer that because I want to tell them, well, they need to have their alien card, but yet they don't. And then in the light of, our presidency, what should they do? And I don't know if you can answer that, but I really honestly don't know how to answer them because I'm just a social studies teacher.
Yeah.
And I don't deal with all these policies.
So most of these people, they are green card holders, but they just didn't renew?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they didn't renew because they were thinking, oh, I can do this. And then it's so interesting because I had another scenario where they were going to, and then just the next day, Trump issues all of these different things, and they're like, what should I do? And I'm like, I don't know.
So, okay, I want to preface it first by saying I'm not an attorney, but I would think that they should be okay to just renew because they're just renewing it, unless if maybe they've had a criminal conviction or some type of criminal record since they last renewed, that might end up flagging them. I would say I think it should be generally safe for them just to do it, but I understand why they would be afraid.
Yeah,
because that would take them going to USCIS and supplying all that documentation. But if it helps at all, they shouldn't be deportable. Even if their green card expires, your green card status does not expire. Like you have that until you naturalize or lose it. So I would say they should, but it really depends on what they're comfortable with.
Yeah.
But that's
they're just very nervous, right now with everything that's going on.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
I think a lot of people are not informed that a lot of people who are crossing the border currently are no longer, the majority are no longer Mexicans. A lot of them from the Northern Triangle, which includes Guatemalan, Hondurans, and Salvadorians. And so I guess the statement out there, go back to Mexico, can be very misleading. And a lot of it is caused by U.S. Deporting a lot of youth who didn't grow up in that, I guess, that country, that space, and going back there to create gangs of violence that really create, it really is the reason why a lot of women and children are the ones crossing borders.
Right.
Just kind of want to talk about Middle East a little bit, or Syria. I'm political science major, and my political science has to often talk about current events, and Trump kind of bash on them sometimes. Me and my students, we're pretty cynical, or we're kind of sarcastic, and I think there's 2 student presenters, and we were talking about Syria, and how Trump, he passed this executive order to, I guess, stop refugees from coming into America. But then there was, thankfully, the American system, because it's a check and balance system, the Supreme Court kind of, stopped that from passing through, so that was a good thing.
Yeah.
But there's, it's kind of terrifying to know that there's people like Trump, who's just so ignorant, and I guess, was it in Afghanistan or Syria? I guess Trump sent a missile or a bomb there, and in response to, I think the leader in that country was doing chemical.
Syria, I think.
Yeah, Syria. And so the kids were being gas, and so Trump bombed that place. But it's kind of well.
But he won't take refugees back in the country.
Yeah, so it was and he said that, I want to save the children.
Right.
But that's so hypocritical because you didn't even accept refugees coming to America. So
right.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Any other last observations or comments to share?
What about the H1B one, the visa program?
The recent executive order?
Yeah, the one where if you're from a different country and you're working here, let's say for especially the Fortune 500 companies where we have a lot of pool of immigrants that come here from different countries and work here, and then they said they're going to get rid of that, so then the workers and employees don't know how to do that, but then the employers themselves want to keep those workers too, so I don't know how that's going to work out.
The thing is, it's an executive order, and these executive orders, they're just, it kind of creates the environment to push federal agencies and members of Congress to pass legislation which would actually mandate change to happen. So on the surface, it doesn't have policy teeth unless Congress passes a law, but it is really bad because it sets a stage for them to do so. And in fact, that executive order just came out last week, so that's like a brand new development as well. So as you guys can see, you know, he's not only attacking undocumented people, people who have criminal convictions, he's also attacking legal permanent residents, you know, and basically he's criminalizing a huge population of people and trying to deport them because, you know, he and his buddies don't think they necessarily belong in this country. You know, that's the long and short of it. And I don't want this to be a political discussion in a sense that, you know, in case there are any Trump supporters here, like, feel free to push back. But his rhetoric has definitely been very, very harmful for many, many of our communities. And, you know, just going through this, but a lot of you guys already kind of talked about it. You know, in his first 100 days of office, he passed a number of different executive orders, you know, from what was mentioned earlier, there was a refugee Muslim ban. Originally he passed one, it was like late January, and it created a lot of chaos throughout the country because refugees were trying to get in, and then they were trying to keep them out. It also impacted people that had green cards, and then people that had visas to the United States. And luckily, Federal District Court in Hawaii issued a preliminary injunction, which basically froze that ban from going through. But then in response, the administration issued another ban just last month, which revised it slightly, but basically it still slashed refugee admissions, it still banned refugee admissions from Syria, and it halted refugee resettlement for like 120 days. And it also banned issuing visas or allowing people from 6 Muslim majority countries, which many advocates saw to be the beginning of like a Muslim ban. So which is basically unconstitutional. You know, you can't ban people just because they practice a certain religion. Which is why in March, there were 3 federal district court decisions that once again blocked this ban. So right now you might be wondering, you know, what might happen next. It might be difficult to predict, but some legal advocates are saying that the administration will probably try to file a suit or a brief to counteract that preliminary injunction, but it could go all the way up to the Supreme Court. So that's something that we're definitely monitoring. And, you know, as you guys know, because Southeast Asian Americans, you know, basically came here as refugees, and, you know, the 1980 Refugee Act is basically their legacy. This is definitely something that these communities are very concerned about. Next, there was an executive order on interior enforcement. Basically what this is a mandate that expands deportation. So it basically, he mandated for an additional number of ICE and Customs and Border Patrol agents on the ground. It basically eliminated a lot of due process rights for immigrants. So in the past, for example, you were deportable if you had a criminal conviction. Under this executive order, you could just be charged with a crime and not convicted, but still be eligible for deportation, which is completely unconstitutional. Second, all of the protections that we had under President Obama, I'm sorry, under President Obama, that basically, so all of the protections we had under President Obama that basically laid out what the priorities for deportation were. Because essentially there are millions of people in this country that could technically be deportable under a law. But since we don't have the capacity, the money, the resources, the manpower, the Obama administration tried to prioritize those that could be removed and said, okay, if you are a threat to public safety, then you are the first to go. Under the Trump administration, all those priorities went out the window. He basically said, if you're undocumented, if you have a criminal conviction, according to our immigration laws, you are deportable, so we are coming after you. And last was an executive order on the border wall. So some of the effects we saw after the executive order was passed, we saw mass raids throughout the country. It was very scary. Among those that were impacted was a DACA recipient out in Seattle, Washington. I think last week, the very first DACA eligible person was deported, which was incredibly devastating. A domestic violence survivor in Texas, and then a Cambodian green card holder with a 30-year-old conviction was detained out in North Carolina. And some experts and advocates are saying that, under the Obama administration, most of these raids happen in the nighttime. They kind of try to do it in secret. These raids they found happened during the day. It's like they were trying to send a message to the community that, this administration, we are deporting people and we're not ashamed to show it to you. And they essentially mainly targeted cities that practice what you call sanctuary city policies. So these are policies that basically say that they will not cooperate with ICE and will prioritize building relationships between local law enforcement and the immigrant communities in their localities. So specific, yes?
Could you do you know offhand what some of those cities are that sanctuary? I know Minneapolis is a sanctuary, but
Yes, I actually have a list right here. I know that some of them were in, okay. Well, I have the states, not necessarily cities, but North Carolina, Texas, Minnesota, New York, and California. I think there were a few also specifically in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles area. And then, yeah. That's for the raids at least, the general raids. And now specific to Southeast Asian Americans and try to understand its impact. So I was going to show you guys a video, but I guess I don't have any audio. It wasn't requested. But I did want to give a shout out and introduce somebody in the room, because it was his story that I was going to share. Ched, is it okay if I introduce you? Yeah. Okay. This is Chedman. He is from Minnesota, and he was a part of this amazing campaign called the Release Minnesota 8 campaign. Has anybody heard about the campaign? Yeah. Ched, did you want to talk a little bit about it? Because it really started from his wife's amazing organizing and really his story that really drove the campaign.
Well, my name is Ched, and I was one of the 8 men detained last August 26th. And ICE did a sweep and took 8 of us in, brought us to go see the consulate. And it was very frustrating that that we were taken in while we were doing so well in life. And all of us have well-established families. In the fight with Release Minnesota 8, all the families that stood together to reach out to the communities, to all nationally to help. And I don't know, it's really hard for me to talk about it, but this is the outcome. It's worth the fight, and thanks to all the supporters, I'm here to show you it works.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Ched. So Ched is being very modest. I just want to say that, so this campaign, it was a campaign basically driven by his wife, Jenny. And it came about because back in August, there were 8 Cambodian community members that were asked to check in with ICE. They were detained and they were put in deportation proceedings. So Ched's wife Jenny reached out to the other family members to try to get some kind of support around this campaign. They reached out to national organizations such as CIRAC, they reached out to organizations throughout the country, they reached out to lawmakers, and their campaign blew up. They got national media attention, The New Yorker wrote about them, a number of Minnesota outlets, NBC News Asia, I believe. And as a result, unfortunately, 4 out of the 8 had been deported last month. But as a result of the mass community mobilization, Ched was able to get his immigration case reopened, and he was able to secure deportation relief. And there are 3 other members right now that are still in the country trying to fight their legal battle to stay in the country. And this is completely unprecedented because fighting a deportation order is really, really difficult. But due to the mass community awareness and the mass community support, a lot of lawmakers came out and spoke in support of these individuals, and it really set the stage for, and really created a model for other communities to emulate as they fight their immigration cases. So these are the photos of the 8 individuals, including Ched. And then this is a photo of the community forum that the campaign hosted a few months ago. And it was a few days actually before Chad's immigration hearing. And that's Chad's wife, Jenny, she's in the middle. And it was a really, really powerful event and just a good example of the community coming together. And I did mention earlier that most of the examples and cases we worked with have been from the Cambodian community, mainly because it is Cambodia that is accepting the most number of people back. For the Hmong community, I wish we could find out where this is happening. And later we'll kind of map it out as well. And I'm sure you know community members and family members that might be living in this country with deportation orders. But it seems that this community is a bit more hesitant to talk about it, or at least we haven't received any inquiries or any stories. But it's definitely an area that we want to learn more about. And if you guys have stories, we definitely encourage you to let us know.
I just have a question. Why was it that Cambodia agreed, to accept, like these deportees and other countries didn't? Why did Cambodia agree to that?
That's a good example. That's a good question. I'm not sure. I'm just guessing that the relationship with Cambodia and the U.S. was different. Perhaps the U.S. had more leverage over Cambodia to pressure them into doing this. And luckily, I guess Vietnam and Laos just have been they've just been better with kind of putting their foot down about it. The scary thing, however, though, is this administration has promised to go after countries that don't accept deportees. So although Vietnam and Laos right now don't really accept deportees back, that could change at any instant under this administration. And in fact, we've been hearing rumors from Lao leaders and Lao community members that Laos is going to be trying to work with the United States on signing an agreement. We've also been hearing rumors that a list of 25 or so names was submitted to the Lao government for consideration for deportation just a few weeks ago. And we have been hearing that the State Department has been pressuring them to look at these names. The Trump administration has been threatening visa sanctions. So basically, if you don't take these people back, you're not getting any visas to the United States. And for these countries, that would be very difficult to say no to. But fortunately, the State Department, they're trying to be reasonable in that they want to exhaust all diplomatic means before they resort to more aggressive tactics, which the administration has been pushing. But it is a scary time, because although these communities are safer now, for the first time ever, our offices are getting phone calls, we're getting letters from prisons, we're getting inquiries throughout the country asking, will this happen, when will it happen? And it's something that we're definitely trying to track and monitor very closely. Yeah.
So I just have a question. What is ICE? And then also, if there are cases where you have someone or you know someone or who's being deported, what are their legal rights and how do you help them, or how do they,
So the first question, what is ICE? So ICE stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They're an arm under the Department of Homeland Security, which basically deals, so DHS has under them the Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Citizenship and Integration and Naturalization Services, and then the Customs and Border Patrol. And ICE is the arm that does most of the enforcement and most of the deportation work under DHS. In terms of legal rights for those with criminal convictions, again, I do want to say that I'm not an attorney, so the first thing we always tell people is do find a credible lawyer to advise you on your rights. It really depends on the intricacies and details of their case. In some instances, there might be an avenue to try to reopen their case and get some kind of relief from deportation, like what Ched did. Depending on the crime, though, that also might not be an opportunity. So for example, for a lot of drug convictions, there aren't that many avenues for relief, unfortunately. There are also questions around, when the person was charged, they were charged as a juvenile, there might be some loophole around that. And also looking into, because for many of these impacted community members, for example, since they committed their crime when they were so young, it turns out sometimes they end up finding that their parents naturalized before they turn 18. So they're technically already a citizen, but they just don't even know it. So we always say talk to a lawyer, because a lawyer will ask those key questions, and then based on that, kind of see what their legal avenues might be. Any other questions before we go on? Yeah.
I'm just curious, I know that there are Asian Americans that are service members of the United States. And are there any impact on them? Are there chances that they're going to be for
for example, if they join the army, they join the Marine Corps, the Navy, a Coast Guard, like, and their families, let's say their mom, their dad are deportable. Like, what happens to them?
The one that is in the service, or the mom or dad is deported?
Like, all together, like, as a family.
Unfortunately, no one is protected unless you are a U.S. citizen. Even if you're a green card holder, if you commit some kind of crime under immigration law that makes you deportable, even if you did serve the country, that doesn't give you immunity, although it does give you a stronger case. Because I mentioned earlier, no, ICE can't afford to deport everyone. So if they see your case is particularly sympathetic, you know, say you're a service member, you support U.S. citizen family, they see you're not a threat to your community, they could just choose to turn a blind eye and not go after you. So I think it would strengthen the case, but it wouldn't necessarily protect you from being deported. Any other questions?
I wanted to talk about how good or was it you talk about how what rights do people have, like basic rights, because I know that some folks are really scared of talking or of speaking to a lawyer, right? Even though that the lawyer is or reaching out to the organizations and not be able to help them, or other organizations like that, providing energy to wouldn't be required to report that they're losing their race or that they cannot handle. So, can you talk a little bit about that and share with the folks what they can talk to?
So that's a good question. I mean, to be honest, I'm not as fine-tuned into the know your rights piece of it. I do have resources that I'll offer later. But the thing is, for a lot of the know your rights material circulating out there, I think it's more fine-tuned for like the Latino community and those that are undocumented. Because for many Southeast Asian Americans that end up getting deported, they're usually detained when they do their regular ICE check-ins. So technically, if ICE writes you a letter and asks you to check in, we advise you not to run. I mean, definitely do check in. But at the same time, just kind of, you know, I always say to have an attorney ready. Prepare a family emergency plan in the case that you are detained, like who's gonna look after your kids, try to figure out the financial situation. You know, by law, you do have a right to a legal counsel, although the government won't provide it. So you'd either have to hire one yourself and pay them, or look for a pro bono attorney that would be willing to take on your case. And yeah, I guess you just have a right to inform your family where you are. Like, I should be transparent if you're being sent to detention centers throughout the country. There is a system online that you'd be able to track them. And yeah, I guess those are like the basic ones. For more detailed know your rights pieces, there are resources that I'll provide later on. But those are kind of some of the basic things I would say that one would need to know.
You mentioned the system online to track them.
Yes.
Can you just tell us more about that?
It's like an ICE locator system, and all you need to put is the alien number.
Okay.
I think it's the alien number and the nationality or the country of origin, and then it'll basically tell you what detention center in the country they're being held. So in a lot of these cases, for example, they're sent to different detention centers, and it's frustrating for family members because they don't know where people are being sent. So you just put it in the system, and it should give you that information.
It's called ICE what?
Like ICE detention locator.
Okay.
You should be able to just Google it, and if not, if you can share your email at the end, I can email it to you.
Okay, sounds great, thanks.
Do they get that one phone call like people get when they go to jail?
You know, it really depends, I think, on the detention center. I hear different things. I think some detention centers are more lenient than others, and it just really depends on where they're being held. The issue, though, is I'm hearing a lot of complaints of, say you live in California, ICE will send you to a detention center out in Alabama, which is frustrating because that all your advocates, family, and support are like thousands of miles away. And it's difficult to kind of track and monitor how ICE is treating you, so that's another issue as well. Any other questions? So just a quick poll, I'm just curious as well. Who here knows of someone who was directly impacted by deportation, whether a family member or a community member? Good handful. Are you guys willing to share how, if you guys know how that's impacted them, or, just to be clear, have any of them been deported? Yeah?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I work at a library, so I see families come in under a visa, and they weren't able to renew their visa, and so they were deported back. But this was better. They were deported back to Spain.
Spain, okay.
So I know families who have been deported, but not specifically for the Southeast Asia.
Oh, that's okay, that's fine too.
I work in a school, and some of our students are undocumented. And since Trump has come into office, they've been very nervous and scared. Sometimes they don't come to school because the family's trying to figure out what they're going to do.
How old are your students?
High schoolers. And I had one family that moved to California for a week. We thought they were going to be gone, and then all of a sudden they came back because they thought they had to be by the other family members to try to figure out what to do. But then they came back to town, so.
Are you finding that attendance is much lower now?
Yes.
Yeah.
So then they're just so stressed out they can't do well in their academics.
It's really a terrifying time right now. Like ICE is going all out. They're detaining people, even under the Obama administration, technically they're not supposed to be detaining people in areas like schools and churches and like that. I feel like it's not even being followed anymore. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to add in a comment, like another method that I found interesting in how the government tracks these undocumented people or even like refugees is when students, at least I've been told from my financial advisors, because I work at the financial aid office for UW-Madison, and from what my advisors told me is that a method that the government uses is when students are going to college and they apply for the FAFSA, and they're undocumented, and so if that's the case, then you just flag the government that you are trying to get, in a sense, you're just trying to get benefits from the government.
Oh my gosh.
And so that's just another thing that they can use against you, and so I just found that very surprising and like actually scary.
I'm actually going to address that next. And my next slide is like there's something even more terrifying that could potentially be coming down the pipeline. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought someone raised their hand. Anybody else? Yeah.
Well, there's been a lot of scare in our family. I mean, there's quite a few of us, including myself, who's a green card holder, right? And some family members who, in their younger years, had a challenging youth. And so now with this fear, like, oh, everybody has to get their citizenship.
Right.
But then it's like, what if we tried to, and they track, back to our youth? And so there's like a lot of like those kind of scare.
Yeah. The thing is, we always say the best thing to do to protect yourself from deportation is to naturalize. But then we also don't want people naturalizing if they do have some kind of criminal record, because that's another way for ICE to track you down. So it's difficult. I always say just talk to a lawyer, see if it's safe, because sometimes maybe the crime doesn't qualify them necessarily for deportation, but I can definitely understand why people would be hesitant. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, so like, does time play in any of this at all? Like, if you committed a crime like maybe 20, 30 years ago, does that affect, if you're gonna get deported at all?
So technically, under Obama, they had this term called prosecutorial discretion, which means ICE has the ability to decide who to prioritize for removal. So one of the factors they look at is, okay, how old is the crime? Have they rehabilitated? What does their life look like now? So technically, that should be weighed. Now, it's unclear. As long as you're deportable under immigration law, I would say that you're not safe. And we've seen a lot of family members and individuals actually fit under that criteria. Like, one of the individuals from the Minnesota 8, actually, well, Chad just left, but he committed his crime like 21 years ago when he was like 14 years old. He's like a completely different person now, but he is one of the people that are actually going through deportation proceedings. So, as you can see, like that doesn't even protect you as well.
Can I ask one last question?
Yeah.
Sorry about all these questions.
No
So if like the male or the female is married, right? But because I have some of these circumstances with my students, and one of the spouses is not documented.
Okay.
Does that spouse still get deported even though they've been married for a very long time and their kids are born here?
So they're married to U.S. citizens,
Right.
But then they didn't sponsor the spouse for green card.
Because they're illegal here.
Oh, they're still deportable. Basically, immigration law is this. If you don't have some kind of valid visa, or you have a criminal conviction, you're deportable. Like that's how stringent and strict our laws are. Like there's not much wiggle room, unfortunately. It might make him less of a priority depending on what his family situation looks like, but Trump has made it clear if you are eligible for deportation, you're getting deported.
So like, if you're deported, is there any chance of you coming back to get your citizenship? Like, are you no longer able to enter that country?
That's a good question. I think it really depends on the country, what the bans look like, and it depends on what you're being deported for. I want to say though that if you are deported, you wouldn't be able to come back right away, unless you do it like you sneak in some way, like without the government knowing it. Which now Trump is also trying to criminalize. So, yeah.
Can you tell us what some of those charges were for those Minnesota 8?
Yeah, so I'll share, I guess I won't connect it to who they were just for privacy reasons, but so one of them was convicted for assault, like he shot a BB gun at a moving car. Someone else was convicted of murder, but he was convicted he was a juvenile convicted as adult, and at that time he was like the youngest person in that county ever to be convicted as an adult. And then there was another person that was charged, okay, this one was ridiculous. He got drunk one night, he broke windows at a restaurant, which resulted in $1,000 in property damage, which resulted in a felony charge, which resulted in 365 days in prison, which triggers deportation, but he only served 40 days of probation. And in fact, the restaurant owner even said, like, this is ridiculous, he shouldn't be deported for this. He is also one of those individuals. Unfortunately, I don't have details of all of the individuals, but those were the 3 crimes that we have been given information on. And CRAC has also handled a number of cases related to drug possession, so that's another piece as well. Any other questions? I really appreciate these questions, so don't be shy. Okay. So going off of your comment earlier about FAFSA benefits and trying to pinpoint immigrants for trying to like take advantage or use government benefits, there's this really terrifying leaked executive order that advocates have been monitoring. Has anyone heard about this leaked executive order on public charge? Okay, so this one is really scary because currently as the immigration law is written, undocumented immigrants actually don't have access to means-tested public benefits. So for example, welfare, food stamps, that kind of thing, they're banned from accessing that. If you're a green card holder, you can access it, but only after living in this country for at least 5 years. So under this leaked executive order, it would basically expand the number of benefits that would make somebody deportable in the event that they accessed it. So for example, things like financial assistance in schools, things like emergency health services, like using an ambulance, for example, and a number of child emergency health care benefits. If you access them, you could automatically be subject to deportation. And this is terrifying, especially for those that live in mixed status families. So for example, if your parents are undocumented, but you have US citizen children. And say, you access certain benefits to provide for US citizen children. Or for example, you access earned income tax credit. All of a sudden, if you do that, you can automatically become deportable, even if those benefits are benefiting people that are US citizens. Also, for example, if you lived in this country undocumented, and say somewhere down the line you end up naturalizing and getting a green card, and during the whole time, even undocumented immigrants do pay into Social Security. So essentially it says that if you were undocumented at any point in your life, you don't have access to any Social Security benefits whatsoever. So it basically robs those immigrants of all those years of hard work. And it also pits communities of color against one another. So another thing this executive order would do, it would mandate the creation of a report that would basically do an analysis side by side of how much public benefits immigrants consume compared to communities in the inner cities. So really trying to pit those in the inner cities against immigrant and refugee communities. And this could also have huge implications for new refugees coming into the country, since they are the biggest users of public benefits. So this executive order has not yet been passed, but it has been leaked. And it's terrifying because it gives you insight to what this administration is thinking and just gives you an insight to how just racist and heartless they are, just to think that they would even draft something this horrible. And because of this, even that it hasn't been signed yet, there have been so many immigrants throughout the country that have basically stopped using essential benefits because they're afraid of being deported. So it's already starting to have repercussions. So why does this matter to Southeast Asian Americans? So this is data from 2011 to 2013 census. Many community members that have been living in this country for a while now, think that they wouldn't be impacted by something like this, especially those that don't really rely on public benefits anymore. But this data basically lays out, comparing to the general Asian American population, what the source of income is from the different Southeast Asian American communities. So like what percentage of their income comes from annual income, meaning salary from their employers. What comes from social security income, which comes from cash public assistance, and what comes from food stamps. And as you can see, there is a disparity between these communities and those from Asian Americans in general. So we always try to say that Southeast Asian Americans should really be engaged in speaking out against issues like this, or any issues that would attack public benefits and access to public benefits, because it would definitely impact this community very much. And then just really quickly, congressional effects. So I mentioned earlier, Trump can pass as many executive orders as he wants. Basically, they don't really have policy teeth until legislation is passed and until Congress appropriates the adequate funds to make it happen. So Trump can mandate adding thousands of ICE agents and adding thousands of Customs and Border Patrol agents to start deporting people. But if we don't have the money to fund it, it's not going to happen. You can also mandate the creation of a border wall. If you don't have the money, it's not going to happen. But to see what has happening in Congress is this administration is really setting the tone. So for example, this law was passed by a senator out in Arkansas. It wasn't passed, it was introduced by a senator from Arkansas just a few months ago. And this would not only curb illegal immigration, but it also seeks to curb legal immigration. So going off your question on the H-1B visas, it basically is trying to keep the country as wide as possible, kind of going back into the time before the INA was passed, where this country was basically made up of primarily European immigrants. It cuts green card sponsorship, which many Asian American communities rely on to bring their family members over. And it also cuts refugee admissions, which is in line with a line under Trump's executive order. So it's a very terrifying piece. Unfortunately, this has not been getting a lot of congressional support. Hasn't really been moving anywhere in Congress, but the fact that somebody had the guts to introduce it at this point in time really shows you where we are as a country. Okay, so lastly, what you can do. I know that was a lot of information, and it's really overwhelming and scary. But we should encourage community members to be active, be vigilant, report raids, and document raids and arrests happening in your local communities. And I'll share later where you can do phone calls to document that. Work with localities in your cities to designate different areas of sanctuary. It could be a city, it could be a hospital, it could be a church, it could be a school. Just to commit to providing the safe space that will not cooperate with ICE in the event that they want to deport someone. You can educate your community on the rights. So that was a good question earlier, just so that they know, when they do need to cooperate and when they can push back. Continue to reach out and engage with lawmakers to say that you're basically not in agreement with a lot of these policies being passed. Join or host local actions. And I sent a sign-on sheet around. If you guys want to join the CREC listserv, we send a number of updates when it comes to a lot of this federal legislation and administration updates. And we have a number of actions that folks can sign on to in case they want to remain involved. And then these are just a few resources. So that's why I encourage you folks to send me your email, because I'm going to send an email to the group after this presentation. And these are resources that you can share with your community. They're ICE grade toolkits, know your rights presentations, a specific resource guide for Southeast Asian Americans facing criminal deportation, a link that gives you legal attorneys that will provide free legal advice, specifically for Southeast Asian Americans going through the deportation proceeding. And then phone numbers you can call if you want to report any raids or arrests in your community. That's actually the end of my presentation. Before we do the discussion part, do folks have any questions? Yes.
Would it be possible for you to send your PowerPoint to us? That was like a lot of great
I
information.
know.
You put it in very simple terms.
Yeah, if so someone have the sign-in sheet? Oh, yeah, there's a sign-in sheet. Just make sure to write your email, and then I'll make sure to shoot this out within the next few days. Yeah. Yeah.
So I kind of want more clarification or more awareness of this, but so I kind of have this assumption that only spouses can apply for public services or social welfare programs, but could undocumented, illegal, or green card holders, can they apply for public service?
So it depends on the public service. So if you're undocumented, you can't get means-tested public benefits, so things like welfare and food assistance. And this also varies per state. So technically, they also can access things like Medicaid and SHIP, which is for low-income children. But I know that few states have carved out some exceptions depending on where you live. And then for green card holders, you're technically not allowed until you've been living in this country for a minimum of 5 years. At least that's how the country's law currently stands. And honestly, it's even more complicated than that, but that's kind of the basic gist of it. And I can provide additional resources if you want to look sort of more into that as well.
And then also, like, for FAFSA, can illegal or undocumented students, can they apply for FAFSA, or?
What was that?
Like, can they apply for FAFSA? Like,
those that are undocumented?
Yeah.
That I'm unsure of. And actually, no. I want to say no, but I would have to verify.
This is probably not the whole extent, but I work in higher ed, and my understanding is that Obama tried to make a push to have it be nationwide, but that didn't pass, and so now it's on a statewide level.
Okay.
And I know Minnesota does do like something for DACA students, and they apply to what is kind of like the FAFSA, but it's a little
State
different.
level.
Yep, state level.
So it wouldn't be accessing federal funds,
Yep, just
which, yeah, that makes sense.
Just to hop on that, I know that California has something similar called the DREAM Act. I know that Maryland also passed similar legislation a few years ago to allow state funding for undocumented students.
And it also depends on campuses too, right? So depending on the campus, depends on what financial need you have, as well as what tuition you have. So in certain states in Florida, there are undocumented or DACA students who are allowed in-state tuition if you talk about it.
Yeah.
I think this is really important information to share because I didn't even know about it. And last semester I was doing a fieldwork internship, and I worked with South American, like, you know, the family students, middle school or elementary students, like they're kind of you know, with this whole situation was happening with education, like their families are undocumented. And like, I also work with high schoolers too, and like they were a senior, she was applying for FAFSA, and I was helping her with that. So I didn't know that this is.
I mean, to be honest, as you can see, like some of you guys know even more than me, it's really complicated, and I think in a lot of ways it does vary per state. But yeah, I agree with you. It's definitely something that a lot of people are aware of.
So, as long as you are a citizen in the United States, you are safe or no?
You should be. You should not be deportable if you're a citizen, unless the government strips you of your citizenship, and that can only happen if you really did something egregious. But I've never heard a case of that happening. So. Natural.
It applies to like all kinds.
Yeah, there shouldn't be a divide between natural born and naturalized. Yeah.
Does CREC have something like a 101 pager of, you know, of like what you just presented? I think it's so important. It impacts like not just our Southeast Asian community, but it's like all over. I know I even get calls sometimes like, we have family members who's scared of being deported, and is there a phone number we can call in the case that we got raped, or just things like that. And if there was just something that would be useful that we can always have a little pamphlet in hand, that'd be great.
We have like one-pagers, but it's more of like more on data, like how many community members have been deported, how many people have been issued deportation orders. So you're asking more of like, who can I call, what are my rights?
Yes, I would say, yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't have
they have the right to even ask you what your status is, and
Unfortunately, and I agree with you, we don't have anything else that is specific to Southeast Asian Americans yet. We have been getting requests, so I think that's something we are definitely looking into developing. In the meantime, you can look at the links that I'm going to send you guys. I think some of this material might be helpful. But unfortunately, we don't have anything specific to the community yet. But we are looking into developing it.
Can I also say quickly, so there's an organization in Minnesota called Advocates for Human Rights, and they're advocating for refugees and immigrants, and like they have lawyers. And so I think that's an organization that you can reach out to, and I'm pretty sure it's nationwide. I know that Human Rights is a really well-known organization.
What was that organization again? Can you just speak a little bit louder?
Advocates for Human Rights.
Okay.
It's Minnesota.
And also, in terms of just know your rights, it's not necessarily culturally competent, but the ACLU does also have like language-specific know your rights pagers, and they're offered online. So if that's something, like there are some conversations about like cultural competency that are not as relevant for us, but when it just comes to like strategically like know what, like it like breaks down like if ICE is at your door, this is what you do. If ICE is doing this, this is what you do. So they break it down that way.
The issue with that though is most Southeast Asians that end up getting deported, it's not because ICE bangs on their door, it's because ICE writes them and like, okay, you're scheduled for your check-in, and then that's when they end up getting detained. Right. So I'm finding that most of the Know Your Rights presentations I've seen don't address that. Like when ICE writes to you, what is my right? Can I reject them? Can I try to reschedule? Like, what do you advise me to do? So that's where I would like to see something more specific to the Southeast Asian community. For the ACLU piece, do you know off the top of your head if they have it translated in?
Yeah, I know that they've translated it into quite a few languages, because where I live, there's a lot of immigrants, and so they have ACLU, like Know Your Rights in like every language that I could possibly think of, but then also at the same time, since I don't speak certain languages, I don't know if the languages are there, but I do know that there's at least Vietnamese on there. I don't know if Hmong is on there, or if there's like
usually it's Vietnamese they translate, but then the others is like,
I can Google it.
Which has always kind of been a challenge. Just finding what, if you guys know any good translators, by the way, please let me know as well, because we want to get more translated materials out there. It's just it's difficult to find folks that will do it and that will do it right, you know.
I had a question about the alien card that does not expire. I know quite a few people that have had that and never got a new one. I think it's the one like 1986 at Chicago. And they committed some crimes when they were younger. So do you recommend that they get a new one, or just hold on to that old one when you were like little kids?
That's a tough. I would ask a lawyer. That's a tough one, because I always think that if you committed a crime, definitely don't try to flag yourself. And the thing is, I was on a green card before. I know I remember I renewed mine, but I don't remember the questions they ask you. So if it's similar to the naturalization process, where they specifically ask if you committed a crime, I'd say maybe don't. But then it might be different. Maybe they'll just ask, okay, when did it expire? It might be much more simple. I'm not as knowledgeable on that process, so I would maybe try to ask an attorney.
I think one of the questions does ask, did you commit a crime at a certain time? Yeah, because I remember, I think I helped someone fill it out.
Yeah. So I would ask a lawyer what would be the best thing to do. And the card does expire, but the status of being a green card shouldn't expire. Unless, you know, you were caught doing a crime and you're credible and they take the green card from you or something like that. Anything else? So I actually don't think we have enough. Okay, we only have 4 minutes. I just wanted to ask you guys these questions. What you guys have already been sharing, like what you've been seeing in your community. The second question is, one thing you guys have already kind of been saying, do you guys have any additional support or resources that you feel you need in your own communities that might be helpful for CREC to either send to you or maybe even develop funding? We could use that too. Keep funding. Anything else? I don't know.
Yeah, just like what I said earlier, and I think like, you know, we hear a lot about all these new executive orders that are happening or these new issues that rise up, but it's like, I know for myself, like I don't understand exactly how I will be impacted directly to putting it in more simpler terms, and then to like share that with other people, because it is pretty scary, but like there's quite a few of us who are that, like what you're talking about, like that we're green card holders, but it doesn't expire. And we don't know that we needed to update that ever, right? And it does have your little baby picture in there.
Yeah. Okay, so with that, again, I can add you to the CREC listserv. So what we've been doing ever since Trump took office is we do these monthly community calls. And we were doing it a lot when the executive orders were coming out. So we would just tell people, okay, this is what the Trump administration did, this is how it can impact you. And then if you guys go to our website, there's actually a webinar recording of each of these community calls that folks can listen to later on if they're not able to make it. But usually on those calls, you know, we share resources, kind of lay it out for folks on what could possibly happen. And then we take questions from community members that may have specific questions, in case that's helpful for folks as well.
One thing I think that's being material translated, there's for the folks that actually need, but here's the problem is that folks that actually need to know, they're older and they might not be able to read Hmong.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest problem with translating any type of
That's what I heard.
But videos might be able to help, or so there's like a 10-minute video can be shown and they want to come over to your movie night so that we play this 10-minute video that's explaining about immigration rights and what's going to be happening, what the orders are doing, and then we play the movie afterward. Things like that might work, and we might have people become more radio, because we allow them to get their news, hear about rumors, they call and they engage a lot in that way in Wisconsin especially. So that's another way that I would recommend to reach out, especially if you have a local radio station in your area.
Can I ask, in the Hmong community, is the issue of deportation, especially among elders, is it talked a lot about? Is it still kind of stigmatized? Like, how do people approach it? Like, is there just no general awareness, or is it just people don't want to talk about it?
Older folks are really scared, younger people are scared too, and it's affecting young people because their parents never naturalized it and they don't know what to do, and they don't understand or don't know about information. And then they're the ones that are really in trouble, that need fight.
Right, and then they don't know what to do, and then their parents don't know what to do either. It's just kind of lack of information.
And I'm finding that they're really scared, like, until the last minute, they're not coming to an organization in their area of the services, right? Until like it's like the worst case scenario where the student, that child has already disappeared. Is it because of ICE?
Oh.
So they're afraid to come because they're afraid that organizations or even when not be able to help them, or might get deported too.
Okay. Oh, really? So there's not much trust in it.
Yeah. I don't know about trust, but it's just that fear that you're required to report, right?
Okay. Okay, that's helpful to know.
So I think this ties into what she was suggesting as well, is that having like presentations like this that are geared towards high schoolers and college students, because those are the people who are traditionally more bilingual, and so they're the ones that are going to be able to be the bridge to the people who may not be able to read the one-pagers, who may not understand who may not understand English. And so how are ways that we can engage youth in understanding this information so they're protected and they're also protecting their families? And so like even some of the language on this, like even being more base with that, and having like explanations of what does this mean, because like EOs are so hard to read even if you know how to read an EO. So like expecting a high schooler to read it, like some may be able to, but for the majority of students they would be like, and then they'll just like watch the news and be like, okay, like I guess this is what's happening, right? Like so like making it competent for high schoolers and college students to translate this for their families.
Okay, that's a great suggestion. Yeah.
And to piggyback off of her, I don't know about your parents, but a lot of my parents watch a lot of YouTube. So if you can get in contact with someone who can make a video on this, I think, don't you agree that a lot of older generation, if they can access YouTube, would watch it?
Really?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Really? Okay.
Or you could just show your like, hello, watch this video.
And I think like it's really important to advocate too, so going to our legislators, senators, and really advocate and be the voice, because, you know, if we don't go out there, they're not going to know about it.
Oh, totally.
So,
I mean, right now, nothing is going to be happening on a federal level, like nothing good. So we're really relying on the state and locals to be pushing any form of progressive immigration agenda that we can think of. So I think it's going to be key, and the next election in 2018 is also going to be very pivotal as well.
and the good thing is like there are multiple partisan successors and leaders. So after that.
There's also 250 local 2017 elections that are happening this year, especially in Wisconsin.
Oh, Wisconsin.
Wisconsin has elections too, y'all.